In 1943, as the Soviets claw back their territory from German forces, the skies above a Romanian oil field erupt with the roar of engines. Small but nimble, a tight circle of 6 Petlyakov Pe-2 bombers appears, their sleek form silhouetted against the clouds. Suddenly, one aircraft breaks formation. The bomber plummets earthward in a near-vertical dive. It's starting the Carousel, its signature move. Bombs whistle as they fall, striking their target with pinpoint accuracy. The Pe-2 pulls up sharply, fighting intense G-forces as it climbs to rejoin its comrades. Another immediately takes its place, then another. The small squadron flies back to base, and 500,000 pounds of oil are on fire. Not bad for a bomber conceived in a Soviet prison camp. In the early 30s, Vladimir Petlyakov was one of the Soviet Union's most promising aeronautical engineers, leading the Heavy Aircraft Brigade at the Tupolev Design Bureau, along with many other projects. But during Stalin's Great Purge, a brutal campaign of political repression, his brilliance offered no protection. Accused of treason merely for delays in developing the Ant-42 bomber, in 1937, Petlyakov was stripped of honor and condemned as an enemy of the people. Like many other brilliant minds, he was sent to a bleak facility in Moscow, where engineers and scientists were forced to serve the rising Soviet war machine under the ever-watchful eyes of the secret police. Known as a Sharashka, this wasn't just a prison, but a sinister laboratory where the nation's greatest minds toiled in isolation, too valuable to be executed. That same year, Petlyakov and 50 others were tasked with Project 100, a high-altitude interceptor to defend Soviet bombers from enemy fighters. In May 1940, during the grand spectacle of the May Day parade, the V-100, a sleek twin-engine prototype, was publicly demonstrated by Major Stepanovsky, while Petlyakov and his team could only watch from the roof of their prison. But just as the V-100 was gaining momentum, Soviet priorities shifted overnight. The Luftwaffe's brutal dive-bombing campaigns in Poland and France forced a sudden and urgent demand for a similar model to the Luftwaffe's relentless Ju-87 Stukas. With this, Petlyakov's team, already working in unbearable conditions, received a nearly impossible order: convert the V-100 into a dive bomber within 45 days. Working day and night, they preserved core design elements like the wing structure and airframe, while modifying others to meet new demands, strengthening the fuselage, adding dive brakes, and reinforcing the wings to withstand the brutal stresses of dive bombing. With each adjustment, the aircraft edged closer to what would eventually become Petliakov's magnum opus, the Petlyakov Pe-2. Nicknamed Pieshka, or Pawn, the Petlyakov Pe-2 was a versatile twin-engine, 3-seat light bomber, and most importantly, dive bomber. This model had a sleek, all-metal monoplane construction with a low-mounted wing meant to maximize aerodynamic performance while providing stability. At only 41 feet in length, with a wingspan of 56 feet, the Pawn was relatively compact for a bomber, enabling it to achieve an impressive balance between agility and payload capacity. The Pe-2's first flight finally took place on December 15, 1940, amid mounting pressure from Soviet authorities. The project had moved so fast that production began even before a prototype existed, forcing factories to race against the clock to deliver results. Failure simply wasn't an option under Stalin's regime, especially with the Nazis inching closer and closer to the mainland. After that inaugural flight, Petlyakov was released from captivity, and the Pe-2 immediately entered mass production. During the May Day parade in 1941, the Pe-2 made its public debut, just like its predecessor. Barely a month later, the Soviet Air Force officially welcomed the Pawn into service with a few hundred units. However, it entered the scene right as the 24-year-old Soviet Union was about to face its toughest challenge yet. On June 22nd, the might of Nazi Germany crashed against Soviet borders. Once mighty nations like Poland, Denmark, Norway, France, Belgium, and more had already fallen to the Third Reich, and with Operation Barbarossa, Hitler intended for Russia to cave in as well. In the air, Luftwaffe pilots cut through Red Air Force squadrons with ease. Thousands of Red aircraft fell from the skies, their outdated designs no match for for the lethal Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters. Throughout the summer and fall, Russian resistance struggled to find its footing, and the available Pe-2s saw limited action, their potential untapped. Some flew intermittent bombing sorties, while others acted as makeshift night fighters. Amidst the chaos, a new mission soon demonstrated the true capabilities of the pawn. In the summer of 1941, the German army pushed deeper into Soviet territory, tearing through defenses with brutal efficiency. But such rapid advances came at a cost: fuel. The mechanized divisions powering the Wehrmacht's war machine relied heavily on one vital source far from the front lines: the oil fields of Ploiești, Romania. This sprawling industrial network, which included refineries, storage tanks, and pipelines, provided nearly a third of Germany's oil supply, making it a key lifeline for maintaining the Axis war effort. Determined to give their motherland a fighting chance, 6 Pe-2 pawn aircraft, led by Captain A. Tsurtsulin, set course to Ploiești, Romania. These dive bombers were armed to the teeth, each with twin 12 7mm Berezin UBK heavy machine guns in the rear to fend off enemy fighters, while the pilot manned a 7.62mm SH-KAS machine gun up front. For added protection, a third 7.62mm gun could be mounted underneath for ventral defense. But it was the payload that made these bombers truly fearsome. In addition to their firepower, the pawns housed 2 internal bomb bays, capable of carrying up to 2,500 pounds of explosives, with additional payloads mounted on external racks, depending on mission requirements. As they neared their objective, the crews executed their bombing run with pinpoint accuracy. In mere moments, the Soviets set no less than 550,000 pounds of petroleum ablaze, sending thick plumes of smoke climbing into the sky. The raid's impact was such a catastrophic blow that German officials were convinced it must have been carried out by a massive formation of at least 100 Russian aircraft, never imagining that such a small force could cause such ruin. As the war progressed into the summer and fall of 1941, the Pe-2s began to push through the fog of initial setbacks. German pilots, who had grown accustomed to easy victories, were increasingly outpaced by these agile Soviet bombers with sleek designs and powerful engines. This was due to the models being powered by 2 Klimov M105 V12 liquid-cooled engines, capable of 1,100 horsepower each, which allowed a maximum speed of approximately 335 miles per hour at an altitude of 13,000 feet. With a climb rate of 2,600 feet per minute, the pawn was capable of evading interceptors and engaging in rapid dive-bombing strikes. This impressive performance even caught the attention of the Royal Air Force. Faced with helping their newest and unlikeliest ally, they dispatched a contingent of their powerful and famous Hawker Hurricane 2Bs to Venga, vital for supply lines and supporting Soviet operations in the north. On September 24th, as the Hurricanes provided top cover for a Pe-2 bombing run, the British pilots suddenly found themselves struggling to keep up. Even with throttles pushed to the limit, the Merlin engines became strained, and the Russian bombers effortlessly pulled ahead. As winter set in, the Soviet armed forces proved they were far from defeated. The Red Air Force, like every other branch, began to demonstrate its ability to strike back hard, turning the harsh Russian winter into a weapon of its own. On December 9, 1941, a column of retreating German vehicles wound through a narrow, snow-covered road. Without warning, a formation of Pe-2 dive bombers from the 23rd Bomber Air Division roared over the treetops. Swooping down with incredible accuracy, the dive bombers first targeted the lead tracked vehicles, unleashing a wave of destruction that blocked the road and trapped the convoy in place. Chaos erupted below as German troops scrambled for cover, but the Pe-2s showed no mercy. Executing their dive-bombing maneuvers, the pawns returned for successive strikes time and time again, hammering the convoy until the entire line of vehicles was engulfed in flames. Within minutes, the once organized retreat was trapped, with no chance to regroup or escape. The Pe-2s, having completed their mission, ascended back into the sky, leaving behind what was once a proud German column. As 1941 drew to a close, Hitler's forces continued to push into Soviet territory. In response, the Red industrial machine sprang into action. Whatever could be dismantled was packed up and shipped beyond the Urals, while what couldn't be moved was destroyed, denying the enemy any potential advantage. Even with the disruption of factory relocations, Soviet industry produced hundreds of new Pe-2s by the end of 1941. In early 1942, just as the Pe-2 was finally solidifying its place in combat, with hundreds of models rolling out at the Soviet factories, an unexpected tragedy struck the program. On the 12th, Vladimir Petlyakov was summoned to an urgent meeting at the Kremlin. The engineer, confident in his creation, chose to fly in a Pe-2 rather than a VIP transport. However, caught in severe weather, the aircraft never reached its destination, instead crashing into a snow-covered hillside, claiming the lives of all aboard, including the father of the pawn. Despite its growing reputation, the Pe-2 was far from flawless. Pilots and crew alike frequently reported issues that affected its performance and handling. A female pilot of the 125th Guards Bomber Regiment recalled, quote, "The first sensation of the Pe-2 is that of a beautiful bird of prey, a very beautiful and fast machine, but also very difficult." One of the most common complaints centered on the Pe-2's high landing speed, which made the aircraft challenging to control during descent, leading to numerous crashes, especially among less experienced pilots. In the back of the aircraft, the tail gunners faced their own set of challenges, as their machine gun proved difficult to reload and offered a limited field of fire. To improve this, the engineering team, now led by Vladimir Myasishchev, initiated a series of refinements which would continue through the rest of the war. The team reinforced the airframe, upgraded armament, and improved flight stability. The baseline Pe-2 proved so versatile that it spawned several variants. One notable adaptation was tailored for long-range reconnaissance, which shed its dive brakes to reduce weight and gained additional fuel tanks for extended range. Cameras installed in the rear fuselage enabled crucial aerial photography, making it an invaluable asset for intelligence gathering. The aircraft could even carry flares, extending its capabilities to night operations. However, the true powerhouse of the pawn line emerged in the form of the Pe-3. Developed only a few days after the type's initial introduction, it was a long-range heavy fighter and night fighter. It came with improved defensive armament, increased fuel capacity, and additional armor protection. Adapted for various roles, including interception and escort missions, the Pe-3 featured enhanced radios, flame-dampening exhausts, and improved weapon systems. As the pawn continued to evolve with the demands of the Eastern Theater, the increasingly produced Pe-2 and Pe-3 continued to serve in defensive operations and harassment raids. Russian pilots developed innovative tactics during these crucial years to adapt to the rapidly changing battlefield. In the nearly 6-month-long Battle of Stalingrad in the latter half of 1942, these dive bombers hammered German troop concentrations, supply lines, and fortifications throughout the brutal siege. One of the most daring maneuvers was known as the Carousel, which turned the Pe-2 into a deadly circling predator. In this unique technique, models would fly in a tight, coordinated ring over a single target, dive bombing it in successive waves. Each aircraft peeled off in a steep dive, dropped its payload, and then climbed back up to rejoin the circling formation, a rhythm that no conventional attack pattern could match. As the Soviet war machine began to regain momentum, the Pe-2's role expanded dramatically. During the Battle of Kursk, the largest tank engagement in history, countless pawns swarmed over the battlefield, targeting German supply lines, armored columns, and artillery positions. With the launch of Operation Bagration in the summer of 1944, the Pe-2 took on an even more pivotal role in the Belarusian offensive, with squadrons executing bombing raids against German command posts, bridges, and troop concentrations, slicing through the Wehrmacht's defenses and clearing the way for Soviet ground forces. During the Battle for Borisov, female-led squadrons, commanded by Captains Nadezhda Furutenko, Klavdia Fumacheva, and Maria Dolina, showcased the Pe-2's most daring maneuvers, delivering pinpoint strikes, dropping bombs with such precision that they reportedly sent them straight down the chimneys of enemy bunkers, earning a reputation as snipers. As the war ground to its inevitable conclusion, Pe-2 bombers continued playing their fierce chess game, leading Soviet forces through Poland and into the heart of Germany, sortie by sortie. Throughout the conflict, the fast and maneuverable Petlyakov Pe-2 became a key asset to the Allied effort, with an outstanding 11,427 built examples, making it the third most numerous twin-engine aircraft produced during the war, trailing behind only the German Junkers Ju-88 and the British Vickers Wellington. Even after the conflict ended, Pieshkas, in all the different variants, continued to fly in the colors of the Soviet VVS, as well as the air forces of China, Yugoslavia, and other satellite states well into the late 1940s. These aircraft even found new roles as testbeds for pioneering Red State technology and as training platforms for a new generation of pilots. While Western aviation enthusiasts often focus on the heavily armored Ilyushin IL-2 or the nimble Yak-3 and Yak-9 fighters, the Pe-2 remains one of the most significant Soviet aircraft overall. And while its impact on the Eastern Front is hard to quantify, the success of the Russian air campaign would have been unimaginable without it. The Pieshka was far from perfect, a strict and demanding aircraft to master. Yet, for all her flaws, the Pe-2, from its inception in a Soviet prison camp to its final missions over a shattered Berlin, earned the loyalty and admiration of those who flew her. As former pilot Mikhail Mabo reflected, quote, "I was in love with the Pieshka. I was very serious about flight work, and for me, the Pieshka was everything."